Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we are continuing with Swiss Family Robinson, and we're reading, starting with chapter 29, Spring, Spinning, Salt Mine. I can hardly describe our joy when, after many tedious and gloomy weeks of rain, the sky began to brighten, the sun to dart its benign rays on the humid earth, the winds to be lulled, and the state of the air became mild and serene. We issued from our dreary hovels with joyful shouts and walked round our habitation, breathing the enlivening, balmy ether, while our eyes were regaled with the beauteous verdure beginning to shoot forth on every side. Our summer occupations commenced by arranging and thoroughly cleaning Falcon's Nest, the order and neatness of which the rain and dead leaves blown by the wind had disturbed. In other respects, however, it was not injured, and in a few days we rendered it fit for our reception. The stairs were cleared, the rooms between the roots reoccupied, and we were left with leisure to proceed to other employments. My wife lost not a moment in resuming the process of her flax. Our sons hastened to lead the cattle to the fresh pastures, whilst it was my task to carry the bundles of flax into the open air, where by heaping stones together I contrived an oven sufficiently commodious to dry it well. The same evening we all set to work to peel and afterwards to beat it and strip off the bark, and lastly to comb it with my carding machine, which fully answered the purpose. I took this laborious task on myself and drew out such distaffs full of long, soft flax, ready for spinning, that my enraptured wife ran to embrace me, to express her thankfulness, requesting me to make her a wheel without delay, that she might enter upon her favorite work. At an early period of my life, I had practiced turnery for my amusement. Now, however, I was unfortunately destitute of the requisite utensils, but as I had not forgotten the arrangement and component parts of a spinning wheel and reel, I, by repeated endeavors, found means to accomplish those two machines to her satisfaction, and she fell so eagerly to spinning as to allow herself no leisure even for a walk, and scarcely time to dress our dinners. Our first visit was to Tent House, and here we found the ravages of winter more considerable than even at Falcon Stream. The tempest and rain had beaten down the tent, carried away a part of the sailcloth, and made such havoc among our provisions that by far the largest portion was spotted with mildew, and the remainder could only be saved by drying it instantly. Luckily, our handsome pinnace had been for the most part spared. It was still at anchor, ready to serve us in case of need, but our tugboat was in too shattered a state to be of any further service. In looking over the stores, we were grieved to find the gunpowder, of which I had left 3 barrels in the tent, the most damaged. The contents of 2 were rendered wholly useless. I thought myself fortunate in finding the remaining one in tolerable condition, and derived from this great and irreparable loss a cogent motive to fix upon winter quarters, where our stores, our only wealth, would not be exposed to such cruel dilapidations. Fritz and Jack were constant in their endeavors to make me undertake the excavation of the rock, but I had no hopes of success. Robinson Crusoe found a spacious cavern that merely required arrangement. No such cavity was apparent in our rock, which bore the aspect of extreme solidity and impenetrableness, so that with our limited powers, 3 or 4 summers would scarcely suffice to execute the design. Still, the earnest desire of a more substantial habitation to defend us from the elements perplexed me incessantly, and I resolved to make at least the attempt of cutting out a recess that should protect the gunpowder, the most valuable of all our treasures. I accordingly set off one day, accompanied by my 2 boys, leaving their mother at her spinning with Ernest and Francis. We took with us pickaxes, chisels, hammers, and iron levers to try what impression we could make on the rock. I chose a part nearly perpendicular and much better situated than our tent. The view from it was enchanting, for it embraced the whole range of Safety Bay, the banks of Jackal's River and Family Bridge, and many of the picturesque projections of the rocks. I marked out with charcoal the opening we wished to make, and we began the heavy toil of piercing the quarry. We made so little progress the first day that in spite of our courage we were tempted to relinquish the undertaking. We persevered, however, and my hope was somewhat revived as I perceived the stone was of a softer texture as we penetrated deeper. I concluded from this that the ardent rays of the sun striking upon the rock had hardened the external layer, and that the stone within would increase in softness as we advanced. When I had cut about a foot in depth, we could loosen it with a spade like dried mud. This determined me to proceed with double ardor, and my boys assisted me with a spirit and zeal beyond their years. After a few days of assiduous labor, we measured the opening and found we had already advanced 7 feet into the rock. Fritz removed the fragments in a barrow and discharged them in a line before the place to form a sort of terrace. I applied my own labor to the upper part to enlarge the aperture. Jack, the smallest of the 3, was able to get in and cut away below. He had with him a long iron bar sharpened at the end, which he drove in with a hammer to loosen a piece at a time. Suddenly he bawled out, "It is pierced through, Father Fritz, I have pierced it through." Ha ha, Master Jack at his jokes again. But let us hear, what have you pierced? Is it the mountain? Not peradventure your hand or foot, Jack? Cried I. Jack, no, no, it is the mountain, the rocks resounding with his usual shout of joy. Huzzah! Huzzah! I have pierced the mountain. Fritz now ran to him. Come, let us see then. It is no doubt the globe at least you have pierced, he said in a bantering tone. You should have pushed on your tool boldly till you reached Europe, which they say is under our feet. I should have been glad to peep into that hole. Jack, well then, peep you may, but I hardly know what you will see. Come and look how far the iron has gone in, and tell me if it is all my boasting. Come hither, father, said Fritz. This is really extraordinary. His iron bar seems to have got to a hollow place. See, it can be moved in every direction. I approached, thinking the incident worth attention. I took hold of the bar, which was still in the rock, and working it about, I made a sufficient aperture for one of my sons to pass, and I observed that in reality the rubbish fell within the cavity, which I judged from the falling of the stones was not much deeper than the part we stood on. My two lads offered to go in and examine it. This, however, I forbade. I even made them remove from the opening, as I smelled the foul air that issued abundantly from it, and began myself to feel giddiness in consequence of having gone too near, so that I was compelled to withdraw quickly and inhale a purer air. Under my direction, the boys now hastened to gather some dry moss, which they made into bundles. They then struck a light and set fire to them, and threw the moss blazing into the opening. But as I had foreseen, the fire was extinguished at the very entrance, thus proving that the air within was highly mephitic. I now saw that it was to be rarefied by another and more effectual method. I recollected that we had brought from the vessel a chest that was full of grenades, rockets, and other fireworks, which had been shipped for the purpose of making signals, as well as for amusement. I sought it hastily, and took some of these, together with an iron mortar for throwing. Out of it I laid a train of gunpowder, and set fire to the end which reached to where we stood. A general explosion took place, and an awful report reverberated through the dark recess. The lighted grenades flew about on all sides like brilliant meteors, rebounding and bursting with a terrific sound. We then sent in the rockets, which had also a full effect. They hissed in the cavity like flying dragons, disclosing to our astonished view its vast extent. Excuse me. We beheld, too, as we thought, numerous dazzling bodies that sparkled suddenly, as if by magic, and disappeared with the rapidity of lightning, leaving the place in total darkness. After having played off our fireworks, I tried lighted straw. To our great satisfaction, the bundles thrown in were entirely consumed. We could then reasonably hope nothing was to be feared from the air, but there still remained the danger of plunging into some abyss, or of meeting with a body of water. From these considerations, I deemed it more prudent to defer our entrance into this unknown recess till we had lights to guide us through it. I dispatched Jack on the buffalo to Falcon Stream to tell his mother and brothers of our discovery, directing him to return with them and bring all the tapers that were left. My intention was to tie them together to the end of a stick and proceed with it lighted to examine the cavity. In 3 or 4 hours, we saw them coming up in our car of state. I immediately lighted some of the tapers, but not together as I had intended. I preferred taking each taking one in his right hand, an implement in his left, another taper in his pocket, flint and steel, and thus we entered the rock in solemn procession. The most beautiful and magnificent spectacle presented itself. Our sides of the cavern sparkled like diamonds. The light from our tapers was reflected from all parts, and had the effect of a grand illumination. Innumerable crystals of every length and shape hung from the top of the vault, which, uniting with those of the sides, formed pillars, altars, entablatures, and a variety of other figures, composing the most splendid masses. We might have fancied ourselves in the palace of a fairy or an illuminated temple. The floor was level, covered with a white and very fine sand, as if purposely strewed, and so dry that I could not see the least mark of humidity anywhere. All this led me to hope the spot would be healthy, convenient, and eligible for our proposed residence. I now formed a particular conjecture as to the nature of the crystallizations shooting out on all sides, and especially from the arch roof. They could scarcely be of that species of rock crystals produced by the slow filtering of water falling in drops and coagulating in succession, and seldom found in excavations exhibiting so dry a nature, nor even with so many of the crystals perpendicular and perfectly smooth. I was impatient to evince the truth or falsehood of this idea by an experiment, and discovered with great joy, on breaking a portion of one of them, that I was in a grotto of salgem, that is, fossil or rock salt, found in the earth in solid crystallized masses, generally above a bed of spar or gypsum, and surrounded by layers of fossils or rock. The discovery of this fact, which no longer admitted a doubt, pleased us all exceedingly. The shape of the crystals, their little solidity, and finally their saline taste were decisive evidences. Many schemes were formed for converting this magnificent grotto into a convenient and agreeable mansion for our abode. We had possession of the most eligible premises. The sole business was to turn them to the best account, and how to effect this was our unceasing theme. Some voted for our immediate establishment there, but they were opposed by more sagacious counsel, and it was resolved that Falcon Stream should still be our headquarters till the end of the year. Chapter 30, House in the Salt Rock, Turtles. The lucky discovery of a previously existing cavern in the rock had, as must be supposed, considerably lessened our labor. Excavation was no longer requisite. I had more room than was wanted for the construction of our dwelling. To render it habitable was the present object, and to do this did not seem a difficult task. The upper bed of the rock in front of the cavern, through which my little Jack had dug so easily, was of a soft nature and to be worked with moderate effort. I hoped also that, being now exposed to the air and heat of the sun, it would become by degrees as hard and compact as the first layer that had given me so much trouble. From this consideration, I began, while it retained its soft state, to make openings for the doors and windows of the front. This I regulated by the measurements of those I had fixed in my winding staircase, which I had removed for the purpose of placing them in our winter tenement. I had previously marked out the openings to be cut for the frames, which were received into grooves for greater convenience and solidity. I took care not to break the stone taken from the apertures, or at least to preserve it in large pieces, and these I cut with the saw and chisel into oblongs 1.5 inches in thickness to serve as tiles. I laid them in the sun and was gratified in seeing they hardened quickly. I then removed them, and my sons placed them in order against the side of the rock till they were wanted for our internal arrangements. When I could enter the cavern freely with a good doorway, and it was sufficiently lighted by the windows, I erected a partition for the distribution of our apartments and other conveniences. The extent of the place afforded ample room for my design, and even allowed me to leave several spaces in which salt and other articles could be stored. I laid out the interior in the following manner. A very considerable space was first partitioned off in 2 divisions. The one on the right was appropriated to our residence. That on the left was to contain kitchen, stables, and workroom. At the end of the second division, where windows could not be placed, the cellar and storeroom were to be formed. The whole separated by partition boards with doors of communication, so as to give us a pleasant and comfortable abode. The side we designed to lodge in was divided into 3 apartments. The first, next the door, was the bedroom for my wife and me, the second a dining parlor, and the last a bedroom for the boys. As we had only 3 windows, we put one in each sleeping room. The third was fixed in the kitchen, where my wife would often be. A grating for the present fell to the lot of our dining room, which when too cold was to be exchanged for one of the other apartments. I contrived a good fireplace in the kitchen near the window. I pierced the rock a little above, and 4 planks nailed together and passing through this opening answered the purpose of a chimney. We made the workroom near the kitchen of sufficient dimensions for the performance of undertakings of some magnitude. It served also to keep our cart and sledge in. Lastly, the stables, which were formed into 4 compartments to separate the different species of animals, occupied all the bottom of the cavern on this side. On the other were the cellar and magazine. The long stay we made at Tent House during these employments furnished us an opportunity of perceiving several advantages we had not reckoned upon. Immense turtles were often seen on the shore, where they deposited their eggs in the sand, and they regaled us with a rich treat. But extending our wishes, we thought of getting possession of the turtles themselves for livestock, and of feasting on them whenever we pleased. As soon as we saw one on the sands, one of my boys was dispatched to cut off its retreat. Meanwhile, we approached the animal and quietly, without doing it any injury, turned it on its back, then passed a long cord through the shell and tied the end of it to a stake, which we fixed close to the edge of the water. This done, we set the prisoner on its legs again. It hastened into the sea, but could not go beyond the end of the cord. Apparently, it was all the happier, finding food with more facility along shore than out at sea, and we enjoyed the idea of being able to take it when wanted. A number of sea dogs came into Safety Bay and ascended the river in search of prey, sporting in the water along shore without evincing any fear of us. The fish presented no attraction to the palate, but its skin, tanned and dressed, makes excellent leather. I was in great need of it for straps and harness to make saddles for Fritz and Jack to ride the onagra and buffalo, and in short for our own use to cut up into soles, belts, and pantaloons, of which articles we much wanted a fresh supply. Besides, I knew the fat yielded good lamp oil that might be substituted for tapers in the long evenings of winter, and that it would be further useful in tanning and rendering the leather pliant. At this time, I likewise made some improvements in our sledge to facilitate the carrying of stores from Falcon Stream to our dwelling in the Rocket Tent House. I raised it on 2 beams, on axle trees, at the extremities of which I put on the 4 gun carriage wheels I had taken off the cannon from the vessel. By this alteration, I obtained a light and convenient vehicle of moderate height, on which boxes and casks could be placed. Pleased with the operations of the week, we set out all together with cheerful hearts for Falcon Stream to pass our Sunday there, and once more offer our pious thanks to the Almighty for all the benefits he had bestowed upon his defenseless creatures. Chapter 31. New Fishery, New Experiments, New Discoveries, and House. The enterprise of our dwelling went on, sometimes as a principal, sometimes as an intermediate occupation, according to the greater or less importance of other concerns. But though we advanced thus with moderate rapidity, the progress was such as to afford the hope of our being settled within it by the time of the rainy season. From the moment I discovered gypsum to be the basis of the crystal salt in our grotto, I foresaw some great advantages I should derive from it. But to avoid enlarging the dimensions of our house by digging further, I tried to find a place in the continuation of the rock which I might be able to blow up. I had soon the good fortune to meet with a narrow slip between the projections of the rock, which I could easily, by the means I proposed, convert into a passage that should terminate in our workroom. I found also on the ground a quantity of fragments of gypsum, and removed a great number of them to the kitchen, where we did not fail to bake a few of the pieces at a time when we made a fire for cooking, which, thus calcined, rubbed into a powder when cold. We obtained a considerable quantity of it, which I put carefully into casks for use when the time should come for finishing the interior of our dwelling. My notion was to form the walls for separating the apartments of the squares of stone I had already provided, and to unite them together with the cement of this new ingredient, which would be the means both of sparing the timber and increasing the beauty and solidity of the work. One day, as Jack and I were walking near the mouth of Jackal's River, we perceived immense quantities of a large fish moving slowly toward the banks. As they came nearer, I distinguished the largest to resemble sturgeons, a fish found in higher latitudes, while the smallest I pronounced to be salmon. Jack now strutted about in ecstasies. "What say you now, father?" said he. "This is nothing like your little paltry fry. A single fish of this troop would fill a tub." "No doubt," answered I, and with great gravity I added, "Prithee, Jack, step into the river and fling them to me one by one, that I may take them home to salt and dry." He looked at me for a moment with a sort of vacant doubt if I could possibly be in earnest, then seizing suddenly a new idea, "Wait a moment, father," cried he, "and I will do so." And he sprang off like lightning toward the cavern, from whence he soon returned, loaded with a bow and arrows, the bladders of the sea dogs, and a ball of string, to catch, as he assured me, every one of the fishes. I looked on with interest and curiosity to mark what was next to happen, while the animation of his countenance, the promptitude and boyish gracefulness of his motions, and the firm determination of his manner afforded me the highest amusement. He tied the bladders round at certain distances with a long piece of string, to the end of which he fastened an arrow and a small iron hook. He placed the large ball of string in a hole in the ground at a sufficient distance from the water's edge, and then he shot off an arrow, which the next instant stuck in one of the largest fishes. My young sportsman uttered a shout of joy. At the same moment, Fritz joined us, and witnessed this unexpected feat without the least symptom of jealousy. "Well done, brother Jack," cried he, "but let me too have my turn." Saying this, he ran back and fetched the harpoon and the windlass, and returned to us accompanied by Ernest. We were well pleased with their opportune arrival, for the salmon Jack had pierced struggled so fiercely that all our endeavors to hold the string were insufficient, and we dreaded at every throw to see it break and the animal make good its escape. By degrees, however, its strength was exhausted, and aided by Fritz and Ernest, we succeeded in drawing it to a bank, where I put an end to its existence. This fortunate beginning of a plan for a fishery inspired us all with hope and emulation. Fritz eagerly seized his harpoon and windlass. I, for my part, like Neptune, wielded a trident. Ernest prepared the large fishing rod, and Jack his arrow, with the same apparatus as before, not forgetting the bladders, which were so effectual in preventing the fish from sinking when struck. We were now more than ever sensible of our loss in the destruction of the tub-boat, with which we could have pursued the creatures in the water and have been spared much pains and difficulty. But on the other hand, such numbers of fishes presented themselves at the mouth of the river that we had only to choose among them. Jack's arrow, after missing twice, struck the third time a large sturgeon, which was so untractable that we had great difficulty in securing him. I, too, had caught 2 of the same fish, and had been obliged to go up to the middle in the water to manage my booty. Ernest, with his rod and line and a hook, and had also taken 2 smaller ones. Fritz, with his harpoon, had struck a sturgeon at least 8 feet in length, and the skill and strength of our whole company were found necessary to conduct him safe to shore, where we harnessed the buffalo to him with strong cords to draw him to Tent House. When these various concerns were complete, we began to meditate a plan for constructing a small boat as a substitute for the tub raft to come close in to shore. I had a great desire to make it, as the savages do, of the rind of a tree, but the difficulty was to fix on one of sufficient bulk for my purpose, for though many were to be found in our vicinity, yet each was on some account or other of too much value to be spared. We therefore resolved to make a little excursion in search of a tree of capacious dimensions, and in a situation where it was not likely to yield us fruit, to refresh us with its shade, or to adorn the landscape round our dwelling. We arrived at Falcon Stream, where we intended to pass the night. We visited the ground my wife had so plentifully sowed with grain, which had sprung up with an almost incredible rapidity and luxuriance, and was now nearly ready for reaping. We cut down what was fairly ripe, bound it together in bundles, and conveyed it to a place where it should be secure from the attacks of more expert grain consumers than ourselves, of which thousands hovered round the booty. We reaped barley, wheat, rye, oats, peas, millet, lentils, only a small quantity of each, it is true, but sufficient to enable us to sow again plentifully at the proper season. The plant that had yielded the most was maize, a proof that it best loved the soil. It had already shown itself in abundance in our garden at Tent House, but here there was a surface of land the size of an ordinary field, entirely covered with its splendid golden ears, which still more than the other plants attracted the voracity of the feathered race. The moment we drew near, a dozen at least of large bustards sprang up with a loud rustling noise, which awakened the attention of the dogs. They plunged into the thickest parts and routed numerous flocks of birds of all kinds and sizes, who took hastily to flight. Among the fugitives were some quails, who escaped by running, and lastly some kangaroos, whose prodigious leaps enabled them to elude the pursuit of the dogs. We were so overcome by the surprise such an assemblage of living creatures occasioned as to forget the resource we had in our guns. We stood, as it were, stupid with amazement during the first moments, and before we came to ourselves, the prey was beyond our reach and for the most part out of sight. Fritz was the first to perceive and to feel with indignation the silly part we had been playing, and to consider in what way we could repair the mischief. Without further loss of time, he took the bandage from his eagle's eyes, for the bird always accompanied him perched upon his game bag, and showed him with his hand the bustard still flying in at no great distance. The eagle took a rapid flight. Fritz jumped like lightning on the back of his onagra and galloped over everything that intervened in the direction the bird had taken, and we soon lost sight of him. We now beheld a spectacle which in the highest degree excited our curiosity and interest. The eagle had soon his prey in view. He mounted above one of the bustards in a direct line without losing sight of it for an instant, and then darted suddenly down. The bustards flew about in utter confusion, now seeking shelter in the bushes, then crossing each other in every direction in the attempt to evade the common enemy. But the eagle remained steady in pursuit of the bird he had fixed upon for his prey, and disregarded all the rest. He alighted on the unlucky bustard, fixed his claws in its beak in its back, till Fritz, arriving full gallop, got down from the onagra, replaced the bandage on the eagle's eyes, seated him once more upon the game bag, and having relieved the poor bustard from his persecutor, he shouted to us to come and witness his triumph. We ran speedily to the place. At the conclusion of this adventure, we hastened forward to Falcon Stream and dressed the wounds of the bustard. We perceived with pleasure that it was a male, and foresaw the advantage of giving him for a companion to our solitary female of the same species, which was completely tamed. I threw a few more bundles of maize into the cart, and without further delay we arrived at our tree. The rest of the day was employed in picking the grains of the different sorts of corn from the stalks. We put what we wished to keep for sowing into some gourd shells, and the turkey wheat was laid carefully aside in sheaves till we should have time to beat and separate it. Fritz observed that we should also want to grind it, and I reminded him of the hand mill we had secured from our departed ally, the wrecked vessel. Fritz: "But, father, the hand mill is so small and so subject to be put out of order. Why should we not contrive a water mill as they do in Europe? We have surely rapid streams of water in abundance." Father: "This is true, but such a mechanism is more difficult than you imagine. The wheel alone, I conceive, would be an undertaking far beyond our strength or our capacity. I am, however, well pleased with the activity and zeal which prompted your idea, and we will hereafter consider it may be worthwhile to bestow upon it further attention. We have abundance of time before us, for we shall not want a water mill till our harvests are such as to produce plentiful crops of corn. In the meantime, let us be thinking of our proposed excursion for tomorrow, for we should set out at least by sunrise. We began our preparations accordingly. My wife chose some hens and 2 fine cocks, with the intention of taking them with us and leaving them at large to produce a colony of their species at a considerable distance from our dwelling places. I, with the same view, visited our beasts and selected 4 young pigs, 4 sheep, 2 kids, and 1 male of each species, our numbers having so much increased that we could well afford to spare these individuals for the experiment. If we succeeded in thus accustoming them to the natural temperature and productions of our island, we should have eased ourselves of the burden of their support, and should always be able to find them at pleasure. We took this time a new direction, which was straightforward between the rocks and the shore, that we might make ourselves acquainted with everything contained in the island we seemed destined forever to inhabit. We found, as usual, much difficulty in pushing through the tall, tough grass, and alternately through the thick, prickly bushes which everywhere obtruded themselves. We were often obliged to turn aside while I cut a passage with my hatchet, but these accidents seldom failed to reward my toil by the discovery of different small additions to our general comfort. Among others, some roots of trees curved by nature to serve both for saddles and yokes for our beasts of burden. I took care to secure several and put them in the cart. In about an hour, we found ourselves at the extremity of the wood, and a most singular phenomenon presented itself to our view. A small plain, or rather a grove of low bushes, to appearance almost covered with flakes of snow, lay extended before us. Suddenly, a suspicion crossed my mind, and was soon confirmed by Fritz, who had darted forward on his onagra, and now returned with one hand filled with tufts of a most excellent species of cotton, so that the whole surface of low bushes was in reality a plantation of that valuable article. The pods had burst from ripeness, and the winds had scattered around their flaky contents. The ground was strewed with them. They had gathered in tufts on the bushes, and they floated gently in the air. The joy of this discovery was almost too great for utterance. We collected as much cotton as our bags would hold, and my wife filled her pockets with the seed to raise it in our garden at Tent House. It was now time to proceed, and we took a direction toward a point of land which skirted the wood of gourds, and being high, commanded a view of the adjacent country. I conceived a wish to remove our establishment to the vicinity of the cotton plantation and the gourd wood, which furnished so many of the utensils for daily use throughout the family. I pleased myself in idea with a view of the different colonies of animals I had imagined, both winged and quadruped. And in this elevation of my fancy, I even thought it might be practicable to erect a sort of farmhouse on the soil, which we might visit occasionally, and be welcomed by the agreeable sounds of the cackling of our feathered subjects, which would so forcibly remind us of the customs of our forsaken but ever-cherished country. We accordingly soon reached the high ground, which I found in all respects favorable to my design. My plan for a building was approved by all, and we lost no time in pitching our tent and forming temporary accommodations for cooking our victuals. When we had refreshed ourselves with a meal, I, for my part, resolved to look about in all directions, that I might completely understand what we should have to depend upon in this place, in point of safety, salubrity, and general accommodation. I had also to find a tree that would suit for the proposed construction of a boat, and lastly, to meet, if possible, with a group of trees at such fit distances from each other as would assist me in my plan of erecting a farmhouse. I was fortunate enough in no long time to find in this last respect exactly what I wanted, and quite near to the spot we on so many accounts had felt to be so enviable. I returned to my companions, whom I found busily employed in preparing excellent beds of the cotton, upon which, at an earlier hour than usual, we all retired to rest. We'll stop there for now and start next time with Chapter 32. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.